Okay, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. I have a really cool review for you guys from the brand BOLDR. A little about them. BOLDR Supply Company is based out of Singapore and Malaysia, and they manufacture watches and watch gear that's super tough, stylish, yet functional, and always ready for adventure. In terms of the type of watch, this is a traveler's watch. Some key characteristics and design when you're looking for something within this space. Of course, you're going to want to find that GMT or world timer functionality, so you're able to track multiple time zones with relative ease. This is their Safari GMT in the Banff colorway, and it's essentially inspired by the breathtaking beauty of Canada's Banff National Park, reflecting the park's vibrant hues. You can get this for $469 direct from BOLDR, and this piece was very kindly lent into the channel so that I could spend a little bit of time with it and share my thoughts with you all. So with all that being said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay guys, so as you can see, very nice versatile layout here. I'd say this design aesthetic is a little bit more sedate than typically what you would find from BOLDR. I think they definitely toned this one down a bit and made it, I think, a little bit more universally appealing. Very, very handsome, and of course still legible, and definitely still has that BOLDR aesthetic. Actually, let me give the crystal a quick little wipe here. Still has, I think, that beautiful yet functional aesthetic, and I'm really liking the color play here with that kind of deeper teal and black. Also, you're getting some nice kind of degraded fume effect there on the dial. Although it is a matte dial, you can still see it does kind of have a gradation there towards the outer edges of the dial, which darkens things, which is going to give you a nice bit of contrast, as well as, you know, still playing off the nice pop of color that you have there as well. So very handsome, I think, at a glance, and I think the longer you look at it, you're going to find even more to like. Now at $469 direct, this is definitely not super cheap, but it's also not anywhere near expensive, especially considering that it is a mechanical GMT. You know, thanks to, of course, the movement, the NH34 collar style GMT from Seiko, it has made really opened the gates for a lot of brands to be able to come out with these types of GMTs, which I think is great. Now, in terms of the diameter, here's where more versatility comes into play. Just 40 millimeters across. 12.7 millimeters thick, right? So still nice and thin in terms of the case profile. 46 millimeters lug to lug, that's great. 316L stainless steel, it's all matte blasted. You do have a flat sapphire with some inner AR coating. You do have this nice fixed bezel, which is really cool, and it has a nice aluminum insert with that 24-hour scale, which is great. And then you also do get, of course, the bi-color, so you can tell the difference between AM and PM as well, or light and dark hours. Now, getting into a couple more details here, screw down crown, and it's actually really nicely knurled. Check that out. So very clean there. The movement inside, like I mentioned, guys, and you can even see it, and it actually has a very unique little case back here, so you guys can see if I can get the light on it just right. There you go. Inside is going to be the Seiko Instruments NH34 color style GMT, 41-hour power reserve beating at 3 Hertz or 21,600 vibrations per hour in terms of that beat rate. And when I say collar, that just means that you're going to have an independently adjustable 24-hour hand versus having a jumping 12-hour hand. One of the benefits of the collar style GMT is going to be that you still do retain a quick set date function, so that's great. You don't have to cycle all the way through. So again, it's not like one is ultimately better than the other. I think there's just better use case scenarios where these fit. I think this is great for you tracking a secondary time zone, like making a call right from an office or caller style, where you're just keeping track of a secondary time zone. Maybe I'm in the West Coast, I'm keeping track of the East Coast time zone with that 24-hour hand. That works really well. But in terms of traveling, I think it is nice to have that jumping local hour hand so that you can essentially keep track of your own time back home with the 24-hour hand and then jump around the other way. So again, different use cases, but I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. It's just there's different use cases where they both kind of do, I guess one will exceed over the other based off of, again, the use. So this dial, this gradient matte dial with printed indices and nice matte hands, as you can see, which matches the case. You do also get the date at 3 o'clock there, as you guys can see, a little covered up by the minute's hand. And you're actually getting Japanese Luminova BGW9. So this is going to be the Japanese brand in terms of the particular producers of the Luminova. So that's really interesting and different there. Maybe I just haven't ever seen that noted before. Maybe you can let me know in the comments below if that's something that you're very aware of. But essentially it's a Lume compound, but it's just it's not produced by the Swiss. This one is produced by the Japanese, and it is BGW9 still. Now, in terms of the water resistance, guys, really nice water resistance at 200 meters or 20 atmospheres. Also 20 millimeter lug width with drilled lugs, which is great. You're getting these nice solid links and end links, and you're even going to get quick release spring bars built in, so that's cool. So even though you do have, of course, as a secondary, you do have those drilled lugs so that you could just use a push pin tool very easily to swap out. The nice thing is you can jump them out even easier by taking this bracelet off very, very quickly. The bracelet itself is really nice. It has really short, nicely articulated links. So instead of doing like a fully articulated like 3 or multi-link bracelet, they just did a single Y link, but they made the links short enough to where they drape really, really well. And you can see that right there. They're essentially the width of what most brands would call a half link. So the nice thing is that's going to mean you're going to have really, really good adjustability in terms of getting this to fit correctly. In terms of the taper, it does taper down from 20 millimeters down to about 17.9 or about 18 millimeters. Split pin construction. So yeah, I mean, it is on the cheaper side. So there you go. And then in terms of this clasp, it's actually semi-milled, meaning that you do have a milled folding scissor section, but then the outer portions here are going to be stamped. But you do get a nice push button and of course a flip lock, and then you do have this nicely milled portion. And then in terms of dialing everything in, to a tighter level and a tighter tolerance there, the nice thing is you do have 3 positions of manual micro adjustment. So even though these are very short links, you can really dial things in extra nice. So I absolutely can appreciate that. So with all that said, let's actually get this piece on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this wears really, really quite well. Check that out. Look at the nice drape on the bracelet there. The end links, although they are male end links, again, because of the drape and the turn down nature of the lugs and the end links and how they interface, the nice thing is you're going to see that this hugs the wrist really, really well. And that's not always super easy, especially with a GMT watch, because you're typically going to get a thicker movement thanks to a taller hand stack that needs to accommodate for that GMT hand. But I think this looks great. Of course, if I get my wrist a bit too close to the lens, you're going to get some perspective distortion, and it's generally going to make the watch appear larger than it actually is. So what I like to do is keep my wrist nice and low here, and then just tighten up the frame so that you guys can get still a nice detailed look, but just at a bit of a truer aspect ratio in terms of how this may lay on your own wrist. And check that out. That just looks crispy. Check out the finishing there. I like the finer matte glass, which keeps it a little bit brighter and really brings out the color of steel, versus sometimes when you matte glass something, if you do it a little rougher and it ends up with a more porous finish, it can end up a little bit dull. But you can see here it still has a really nice sheen to it, even though it's not glossy whatsoever. But you can still see, things like these bevels that are really still popping. Check out that bevel there, that transition on the lug. Very, very clean. And look at the way that sits and wraps on the wrist. Again, while not the thinnest, I mean at 12.7 millimeters, it's doing a great job of seeming very, very thin visually. And of course, yeah, physically it's not super thick. But you know, I think that's one thing everybody seems to want these days, are thinner and thinner watches. I think as long as it's proportional, it works. And in this case, it is very, very proportional. And yeah, even though that clasp there isn't the fanciest or most, updated, the nice thing is it flows really, really well, visually as well as functionally, and with the taper and everything on that particular bracelet. But with all that said, let's actually get this piece off the wrist, set up for some Lume shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Oh, yes. So a lot of nice Lume to enjoy here, guys. Again, this is a traveler's watch, but it does have some nice capabilities in terms of low light visibility. So very, very cool. The one thing I always like to work in is going to be a bit of a low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath the overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. And I gotta say, guys, I really like the legibility here, the crisp white indexing, and then of course as it transitions to a bit darker, you're going to notice really nice bright blue from that BGW9, Japanese BGW9. We'll give it a little extra supercharged pop here so we can really enjoy. Check that out. So I think this looks great. And again, it's definitely a bonus, not something that's needed. I mean, it's not like in pitch black, you're really going to be doing a lot of calculating of separate time zones. Typically, you're just going to need more of an at a glance type of readout, but it is nice, again, to just have that there even when you don't need it. So I think that is pretty neat. And you can see there the colors, the way that they play, even though you might think that this kind of teal hue is, might be a bit polarizing for some, but you can see here, in a lot of the light spectrum, it's just going to render as very dark and black, and maybe even a midnightish green or bluish hue. And then it's when you really get into the light where it's okay, it's going to throw you a little bit more of that kind of hunter green, teal green layout. So I like actually that this is quite a flat setup visually, but it also is still quite dynamic in terms of the way the color play happens with this dial, with the bezel, and a lot of that has to do with just the general finishing there. So very, very nice. All right, guys, so with that said, let's actually get this all going back again, and let's talk about closing thoughts. So on the wrist, really nice balanced wear. It hits a nice sweet spot for a sporty everyday piece, and at 40 millimeters, and then of course having all of the numerals there all spelled out nicely, but not feeling quite overcrowded. I dig that. So in terms of model variants, definitely check the site links for options and availability, as there are quite a few different options, and some of them aren't even GMTs, but you can see this Safari line actually has quite a bit of depth to it. Now, in terms of comparable models, while the affordable automatic GMT space has really exploded thanks to Seiko's NH34 movement, at under $500, this BOLDR does offer a lot of personality for the money, and I think that's what helps it kind of stand out. It's not too derivative. It definitely has certain vibes of, military watches I've seen in the past, field watches, but I think it refreshes those ideas in a way that just feels very much within the vein of BOLDR's design aesthetic. So for me, guys, bottom line here is, of course, BOLDR fans will find a lot to love here, but I also think that the Safari line as a whole, not just this GMT variation, but I think the Safari line as a whole does offer a lot of crossover appeal as well, thanks to its versatile and classic silhouette. So with that said, let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please do like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.